Did you ever hear the tragedy of Anakin Skywalker, the Jedi Master? I thought not. It's not a story that Disney would tell you. Hello, this is Dean with On the Brink. Welcome to my audio commentary, breakdown, analysis, trivia, and all things Star Wars as we celebrate the 20th anniversary of Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. Originally released May 19th, 2005, Revenge of the Sith stands out as one of the best Star Wars films, especially in the prequel trilogy. Throughout this commentary, I'll be sharing some things that I've been learning as I've studied the film intensely over the past 2 months, although I feel like I've been preparing for this commentary my whole life. I was about 10 years old when the film was released, and though I wasn't able to see it in theaters due to not being allowed to see PG-13 movies yet, eventually, once I did see the film later on, it became one of my absolute favorites of all time, including in other films too, outside of Star Wars. Star Wars Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith is very iconic. It shows us the bridge between the two trilogies that George Lucas originally intended to create, and there is a lot to unpack, if I must say. If you were lucky enough to catch Revenge of the Sith in theaters when it ran just before May the 4th this year, I'm very excited that you have this film fresh in your mind so that you can listen along and learn a thing or two. I know that I have learned a thing or two from studying this film intensely through various books and through various resources on the DVDs and Blu-rays. Revenge of the Sith has a lot of fun tidbits and behind-the-scenes information to share with you. So, without further ado, let's start the film. My audio commentaries are intended for the viewer to watch along with the film, so go ahead and boot it up on whatever device you prefer. It's available on Disney Plus, or pull out your DVD and Blu-ray. I also want to let you know that you can listen along without the film. However, as you play this audio commentary on your phone or some other device along with the film, it'll be greatly enhanced as an experience for you. As Han Solo and Anakin Skywalker say, this is where the fun begins. I've got the film booted up now. I'm on the 20th Century Fox opening logos, and I'm about to press play on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Revenge of the Sith is, of course, the 6th film in the Star Wars series, 3rd of the prequel trilogy. It was originally, of course, going to be the last one. Takes place 3 years after Attack of the Clones. We all know what eventually happened with the Disney acquisition. We got more films. However, taking a look back at this unique space in time, Revenge of the Sith was the last Star Wars film. And I remember being very disappointed that I would never get to experience a Star Wars film on the big screen. I only got to see The Phantom Menace on the big screen. So these re-releases have been really cool, and getting to have the sequels come out later in life was really cool. So I've been a very happy, well-fed Star Wars fan, but back in the day, this was it. For the prequel trilogy, the great John Knoll was the computer tech that put together the opening crawls for episodes 1 through 3. Of course, as many people know, these opening crawls are reminiscent of old serials like Flash Gordon, and they're consistent across all of the Star Wars films in style. Very iconic look. Everybody knows what it is. So it's very, very, very fun that they've kept that consistent even across the sequels in modern day. We're about to jump into one of the most elaborate scenes ever in a Star Wars film, the opening battle over Coruscant. The Clone Wars are raging across the galaxy, and there's a lot to see. There's a lot to look at. A lot of people kind of look at the scene, some mixed opinions that it's a bit too much of a cluster of too much going on. Just jam as much crap into the frame as you can, but I have always found this scene to be very immersive and very exciting. I don't really have a problem with it. You're welcome to your opinion, but it's very thrilling to see this on a big screen, even on a small screen. The crew for this film was very impressed with the animation done on the battle scenes in the film Pearl Harbor. So they literally grabbed some of those same animators for the opening sequence here of all the ships in battle. Of course, over at Disneyland, Star Tours is the wonderful attraction over there in Tomorrowland, which now has been updated in the last few years to be able to accommodate visiting worlds from all the Star Wars films. And one of the neatest experiences I've ever had in that attraction was being able to experience this opening Clone Wars battle from Episode 3. I always dreamed of something like that as a kid, and it's amazing to now say I've been able to do that. This is, of course, the first PG-13 Star Wars film, and that little piece of debris that hit that ship that we just saw on screen was actually a kitchen sink. They wanted to throw everything into the scene, including the kitchen sink. But anyways, first PG-13 Star Wars film, which is truly groundbreaking. I remember as a kid being, like I said, so disappointed that I couldn't go see it. I was only 10 years old, and a lot of kids went to see it regardless, but my family was of the belief that you had to wait. Tamira Morrison, of course, is back as the clones. We don't get any Jango or Boba Fett action in this film, but of course Jango Fett's dead. Boba Fett was considered to be in this film as a 14, 15-year-old boy. I'm kind of personally glad that didn't happen. Wait to see him later in life in the original trilogy. Anakin's "This is where the fun begins" is reminiscent of when Han Solo first said that line, and I believe A New Hope. The original title of the film, Return of the Jedi, was supposed to be Revenge of the Jedi. George Lucas determined that he didn't really feel Jedi sought revenge, so that word was switched to Return. However, in The Phantom Menace, we hear Darth Maul speak of the Sith revealing themselves to the Jedi and at last having their revenge. So this is the perfect opportunity to name the third film Revenge of the Sith, both as a nod to the original trilogy film and as a callback to what Darth Maul originally talked about. At 1 minute, 16 seconds, this opening battle scene is the longest one-take shot in all of Star Wars until this point, and I don't believe that's been beaten. I believe that's still the king for the longest shot. Obi-Wan is the one to speak the "I have a bad feeling about this" line right as they're about to land in a bit onto General Grievous's ship. And as we were introduced to Obi-Wan and Anakin at the beginning of the film, you can see that Anakin's look has grown to be quite scraggly as a Jedi Knight, and Obi-Wan is morphing into his Alec Guinness style with a shorter head of hair. Anakin now has a huge scar on his face from his duel with Asajj Ventress. You can see this scene happen in the 2D animated Cartoon Network Clone Wars Star Wars series. Anakin is now a Jedi Knight. He's received this honor after his actions on the planet Pre-Sitlin. Not sure how to say that, really. There, on Pre-Sitlin, he almost single-handedly saved our public communications facility. I'll be referencing a few Star Wars books throughout the film, especially the Revenge of the Sith Visual Dictionary and The Making of Revenge of the Sith. Torn by a desire to accomplish great things, Anakin is fearful of change. While he's generally believed to be the chosen one, alluded to in an ancient Jedi prophecy, Anakin frequently finds his hands tied in the same way that the Senate binds the hands of Supreme Chancellor Palpatine. Nevertheless, he's determined to honor Obi-Wan and live up to the title the Jedi have seen fit to bestow upon him. Obi-Wan and Anakin are flying Jedi starfighters, which we've previously seen in Episode 2, as we saw Obi-Wan's triangular Jedi starfighter. These ones are actually a little bit different. They're actually inspired by a Hasbro toy that came out. It's of the Jedi starfighter from Attack of the Clones, which is something really cool for me to learn because I actually own that toy, and I've had it since I was a young boy. Still have it to this day. I've loved playing with it growing up, having it as a fun collectible through the years. So what it does is it opens up on the wing sides, and there's all these intricate things inside, like the wings pop off. So it has that look where the wings are sort of opened up at an angle, kind of triangular, and they start to really look similar to TIE fighters from the original trilogy. So it's kind of a neat segue into the original trilogy designs. I like the way they look in this film. But I also love Obi-Wan's triangular ship in episode 2. Something that one of the concept artists pointed out is that it's a little bit of a cheat how they have their droids in the ship, like R2-D2 and R4-P17. Realistically, the bottom of the droids would be popping through the bottom of the wing as they sit in the astromech port. So take a closer look and you'll probably see there's no way that droid could sit in there. Obi-Wan hates piloting. His scant regard for astromech or other droids doesn't help, yet he remains Anakin's steadfast wingmate in battle, trusting Anakin to pull them through tricky situations. This scene where Anakin and Obi-Wan land inside the giant hangar was inspired by the James Bond film Octopussy, where he flies a small plane into a flight hangar. General Grievous's flagship is called the Invisible Hand. Here on the Invisible Hand, there was a few sequences that were trimmed out. This scene on the Invisible Hand was originally very long. One of the scenes being variations on the take of General Grievous killing the Jedi Shaak Ti, and then Obi-Wan and Anakin immediately having to escape that scenario so they don't get killed as well, or captured, by diving into the floor below, where there's an electrical room with water in it for some reason. I don't know how that makes any sense, but you can see these deleted scenes on the DVD and Blu-ray releases and on Disney+. Shaak Ti was the Jedi assigned to protect Palpatine when Grievous captured them. It's kind of sad that they had Ewan McGregor and Hayden Christensen get into a giant water tank in Australia, only to ultimately get this scene cut out. There's also a scene of Anakin killing Shaak Ti at the Jedi Temple for whatever reason. They really wanted her dead. But that also does not enter the film. When Obi-Wan says he senses a trap, there doesn't really seem to be an immediate trap necessarily, but indeed there is a trap set for Anakin by Palpatine to begin manipulating his compassion that is currently conflicting with the Jedi Code. And the scene with Obi-Wan and Anakin on a mission together is a neat callback to The Phantom Menace. As, you know, episode 1 has Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon, his master, on a mission trying to deal with the Trade Federation. Shooting for production on Revenge of the Sith began on June 30th, 2003, and the first scene to be shot were the ones set in the hallway of the Separatist cruiser, the Invisible Hand, with the elevator doors at one end. Our introduction to General Grievous. His cough that General Grievous constantly has is actually the cough of George Lucas. The reason he's coughing is because he's had his chest apparatus damaged by Mace Windu. You can see this happen in the Clone Wars animated specials also, that is the 2D version, not the 3D version. I love how defensive Anakin is of R2 in the elevator when Obi-Wan is about to make a joke about him. It's very sad to see how Anakin slowly just begins to abandon all his friends throughout the course of this film, including his faithful droid, who, of course, by the end, we have that sad scene where he tells him to stay with the ship. As we begin to get towards the throne room, the scene of Anakin and Obi-Wan entering that throne room, for lack of a better word, I'm calling it a throne room because it looks just like that scene from Return of the Jedi where the Emperor is seated at his chair. It's kind of just like this random large room where he's sitting captured. It's reminiscent of those scenes in Return of the Jedi, and also reminiscent, calling back to the fight scenes of Anakin and Obi-Wan and Count Dooku in Attack of the Clones, where they all face off against each other. This time Anakin's got a little bit more powerful. As Dooku says, twice the pride, double the fall in a second, which, of course, in this case doesn't end well, especially for Dooku, his pride. Chronologically, Return of the Jedi hasn't happened yet. However, in real life, we've already seen where Palpatine tries to seduce Luke to the dark side by taking down Darth Vader in front of him. So this whole scene is a callback to that, even though it takes place technically in the past. There are a lot of interesting, intricate details that Palpatine really tries to take advantage of. We're watching now where Anakin has to take down Count Dooku because he's too dangerous to be kept alive. And he really wants Anakin to be his new apprentice, Palpatine does. The irony is not lost on Anakin that he would kill Count Dooku in an instant, but then later would use the he must stand trial logic against Palpatine. From the visual dictionary, the title of Count has no real meaning to Dooku, the former Jedi. It's simply the name of a political leader in the Confederacy of the Independent Systems, which itself is nothing more than a fabrication conceived by Darth Sidious as part of his plan to topple the Jedi Order and reinstate the Sith. For more than a decade now, Dooku has thought of himself as Darth Tyrannus, apprentice to Sidious, and destined to sit at his left hand as a joint master of the galaxy. Ironically, like I said, as Count Dooku warns Anakin of pride, Dooku's own pride becomes his downfall. The real plan, of course, for Dooku was always to be replaced. In the last film, of course, behind the scenes, Dooku is instrumenting a lot of moves, such as murdering Jedi Master Sifo-Dyas, who is a former friend in the Jedi Order, and this helps him assume control of the plans he's had set in motion to create a clone army for the Republic, and also wiping the planet Kamino from the Jedi archives, as Obi-Wan discovered firsthand in the last film. Hayden Christensen actually injured his knee really badly in a previous shoot, so I believe here in this scene where Anakin and Obi-Wan are taking on Count Dooku, in between all the shots here with the battle scene, Hayden had to do physical therapy on his leg, and often, where possible, his stunt double tried to give him a favor by filling in for him where possible. I believe it was injury on the scenes they were filming for the battle on Mustafar. So Anakin's killing of Count Dooku goes against everything that the Jedi have taught him to this point, but he gives in to his natural instincts and against his better judgment decides to kill him. He can slowly see the head roll away in a quick shot if you pause, but I love that even though this movie is very dark, George Lucas kept it pretty kid-friendly, even with a PG-13 rating. As the Chancellor speaks to Anakin and mentions the Tusken Raiders, we can hear them briefly in the background. I always take this to be Anakin hearing them in his head as if it's a memory, or perhaps it's a direct message from the Force, speaking to him, warning him. The line Anakin says about his fate will be the same as ours is pretty cryptic and foreshadowing, of course. It will be interesting to see how everything plays out. Of course, Obi-Wan will be the first to die among them, then the Chancellor, then Anakin, aka Darth Vader. Each of the clones in this film are completely digital. There was not one suit made for this film. As Anakin and the Palpatine escape with Obi-Wan, you can hear a Wilhelm scream come from one of the clones in an explosion, put, of course, in by Ben Burtt as a signature that he does in each of his films. One of the whole points of the existence of General Grievous in this film is to be extremely reminiscent and foreshadowing as a figure for Anakin of what he will become, half creature and half mechanic. George really wanted General Grievous to be a cunning villain, but not necessarily too overpowered or too much of a threat to Anakin in general. I always kind of see him as like a distraction villain, because of course Palpatine is the true villain, who will be somewhat of a Jekyll and Hyde character throughout this film, and to have his ultimate rise at the end. One of the original actors who was considered for the role of General Grievous was actually Gary Oldman. However, through some temporary voice tracks, Matthew Wood was ultimately decided to play Grievous. And I think he does a great job. Some other voices done by the crew are, of course, Ben Burtt, who voiced the battle droids, super battle droids, and the buzz droids. He is, of course, the wonderful Star Wars sound man behind the creation of the lightsaber sounds and R2-D2, among many, many other things. Ben Burtt said that for Grievous's voice, I tried experiments like Vader's breathing with different electronic tones and different sounds associated with him, but George said he didn't want to confuse Grievous with Vader, and the idea was dropped. In the end, the voice was executed by supervising sound editor Matthew Wood. He tried out for the part anonymously and won it. As you can see, in episode 3, Obi-Wan and Anakin are significantly older. Anakin is a bit more filled in, and Obi-Wan is definitely starting to morph into the Alec Guinness look. Hayden Christensen gained 24 pounds for this film to bulk up, working out, and eating 6 meals a day. He definitely looks a lot less scrawny like he did in Attack of the Clones. The following is an account by Ben Burt on April 2nd, 2004. He says, the opening action sequence in the film, the rescue of Palpatine from the Separatist cruiser by the Jedi, is an hour long. It's half a feature film from the time they arrived in their spaceships until they get back to Coruscant. I've known for a long time that it's never going to survive as a whole because it was out of proportion to the rest of the story. So we've cut out 2/3 of it to get the sequence down to a manageable 20 minutes or so. Shock T, the Jedi taken captive by Grievous, is gone. A sequence where the Jedi cross a hangar on the pipes with Palpatine and R2-D2 rescues them is gone. The Jedi don't meet General Grievous in the Shock T scene anymore, but later when they're captured and taken to him on the bridge of the ship, there are continuity issues taken out of these big chunks. We've solved that as of yesterday by bringing them together in a different way. There are some serious story issues in the film. Anakin turning to the dark side wasn't as satisfying in the last screening. George is brainstorming to fix some of that. This account from Ben Burt is really cool, and further accounts will show some other cool things straight from the Star Wars archives. Ben Burt was actually, in addition to the sound guy for Star Wars, really key to a lot of the editing process in the prequel trilogy. On episode 3, he specifically did a lot of animatics, which are CGI renderings of what the scenes will look like, kind of like a storyboarding pre-visualization. So he was very key to this film and, is always an integral piece of Star Wars. Rob Coleman from the crew has a really neat account about the creation of the look of General Grievous. He says, originally, General Grievous was this super ruthless vampire. Then he became this sniveling, horrible, creepy little psychopath, and now he's in between. George made him 7'2", and then hunched him over, so he's quite a massive hulking character. For movement guides, we studied the original Nosferatu from 1922, the 1979 remake with Klaus Kinski, and Willem Dafoe in Shadow of the Vampire from 2000. Grievous has big, long, cannibal fingers, more Nosferatu than Edward Scissorhands, and does that creepy finger movement when you're not expecting it. His biggest tick is the tubercular cough. Grievous wears a skull mask, and you can see these sickly, puffy creature eyes behind the sockets, as if there's a creature inside, protected behind this bony face. It's a fun acting challenge from our point of view. We have full eyeballs with membranes and this greenish, puffy skin around them. But otherwise, it's very much a white mask with dark holes for the eyes. That made it interesting to figure out how to emote with this character. No eyebrows, no mouth, and he's got a fair amount of dialogue too. Behind these protective armor pieces are what looks like this rather disgusting bag of organs, filled with beating and slithering things. George calls him the gut sack. As soon as digital modeling supervisor Pamela Choi started building the Grievous model, we realized there were all kinds of issues with the design. George actually had quite a process of choosing what the character would look like, and there's footage of that you can watch in the bonus features of Revenge of the Sith. So many different concepts for Grievous, and it's very interesting. So we've just had the death of Count Dooku a few minutes ago previous in the film. Here's a really neat little tidbit from Christopher Lee. He says, not many people realize that Dooku is Japanese for poison. He says, which is very appropriate, really, because he's lethal. From Star Wars Insider issue 69, it reads, Episodes 1 and 2 push the envelope of technology and innovation, with expanded universes, creature shops, industrial light and magic, costuming, and editing tools. George brought Attack of the Clones to the table as the first full-length digital film. The movie was shot on digital cameras as opposed to traditional film. George says, "I'm a movie nut, and I want to make movies better, more enjoyable, and easier and cheaper to make. It's my nature to want to do the best job I can with the resources that I have available to me. I want to be proud of my work. I don't think of myself as a pioneer. I've spent a great deal of money on research and development and tried to push the envelope of the medium, primarily because I want to get the best possible image and the best possible way of telling my stories. I've always found myself bumping against the celluloid ceiling, the technology that says, you can't go here, you can't go there, you can't do that, or the economic resources that say, you can get there, but it's going to cost you to do it. And my feeling is that the artist needs to be free, not to have to think about how he's going to accomplish something, or if he can afford to accomplish something. He should be able to let his imagination run wild without a lot of constraints." As we close in on this scene of Coruscant, they arrive and greet the senators. We see a brief glimpse at the Millennium Falcon flying in. It lands nearly at the same moment as Anakin and Obi-Wan from their public hover transport bus. When Obi-Wan says, "Another happy landing," I always consider this to be one of the last truly happy moments of the film. Of course, there's some other lighthearted things, but it's the last real feeling of sort of the Star Wars joy before you move on to some of the darker elements. And we're only getting a few more moments between Anakin and Obi-Wan in this film that are so chummy. Things get tense really, really fast. We get our brief look at Jar Jar Binks, who has a very minimal role in this film. Of course, he had a large role in episode 1, a little bit smaller of a role in episode 2, but now it's down to about nothing in episode 3 due to a lot of backlash and, frankly, not as much need for use of him. Ahmed Best played Jar Jar, and it was a passion of his to do that. He's a big Star Wars fan, and it was an honor for him to be in the films. He says, "Whether you think Jar Jar is cool or not is completely subjective. There are people out there who try to justify their ideas of Jar Jar, but it's an opinion developed in the constructs of the prejudice they have in themselves. It has absolutely nothing to do with reality. By the same token, there are people who just don't like Jar Jar as a character, and that's completely valid. But as far as Jar Jar being a negative creature, no, he wasn't." Two of George Lucas's daughters can be seen in this arrival party for Obi-Wan and Anakin. Might have to go back a little bit to see, but as well as Jar Jar Binks there, C-3PO, Bail Organa, a lot of recognizable faces. There's some of George Lucas's recognizable faces. In a nod to their future daughter, granted unknowingly, Padme has space buns similar to how we see Princess Leia wear them in Episode 4, A New Hope. Kind of a neat foreshadowing, little tie-in. Padme's revelation to Anakin here is a very life-changing thing, and it's very saga-altering as an event. Padme's pregnant, and now they believe that it's just one baby, but in fact, she's carrying twins. And as we'll see at the end of the film, she's carrying Luke and Leia, of course, the heroes of the original trilogy. Going back to some of the digital filmmaking that George Lucas is so proud of, on April 20th, 2002, just before Episode 2 was released, George says that he had a digital conference at Skywalker Ranch with all the people who had worked in digital cinema. James Cameron, Robert Rodriguez, Michael Mann, me, and the Pixar guys. That was it. That was all the people who had any experience with it. We invited a bunch of our friends to come, so there was maybe 25 to 30 people there. The 5 of us who had worked in digital cinema got up and explained what it was all about, what the problems were, what the tricks were, the advantages and disadvantages of what we were doing, end quote. I truly do think they brought about some considerable change to filmmaking and film cinema in general. I really think that it's very apparent how efficient they've made filmmaking. My opinion is that I think film looks better than digital. However, technology evolves. General Grievous arrives here on Utapau. The planet that General Grievous arrives on is a planet name that was originally in the script for the original Star Wars. As I said, Utapau. George Lucas was finally able to use it here in this last film of his, quote-unquote. It's a sinkhole planet, which is kind of interesting. Pretty desolate planet with a bunch of holes in it. As General Grievous speaks here with Darth Sidious on the hologram teleconferencing, he references a new apprentice, which of course will now be Anakin as Darth Vader. Since he passed the test, he got rid of Dooku and proved himself powerful enough to be a potential Sith apprentice. And of course, Palpatine, being the key player in all of the political and war events, he lets Grievous know that the end of the war is near because he's been the one pulling the strings all along. This whole opening scene of the film with the kidnapping of Chancellor Palpatine, of course, was a complete ruse, completely orchestrated by Palpatine, Darth Sidious himself. Coming into the scenes with Anakin and Padme at Padme's apartment, which is now Anakin's home since they're married as of the end of episode 2. We see a little bit of a love scene between them. Hayden Christensen did get a lot of hate for this role due to some clunky dialogue writing and some line deliveries, but I believe that's actually due to the directing and writing of George Lucas. I don't actually think it's too bad. I think episode 2 had a lot more rough patches, but episode 3 does have some awkward spots. I do love the emotion in Anakin's eyes and the cold presence he has in this film. He's really getting edgier and darker. And you can see how conflicted he is, even as they're sitting together discussing the baby. Anakin's starting to have these swirling feelings about the whole thing, being very uneasy. As we see, Anakin's about to have some nightmares that Padme dies in childbirth. This, of course, makes his thoughts very more so conflicted. Not only is he concerned about his role in the Jedi way of life and the Jedi temple, his role as a Jedi in general, really. Now he's got this personal life that he's not really supposed to have. It's forbidden to have attachments. And he's already lost his mother in the same way that he's had dreams about her and then she did die. So now, oh boy, Padme's having occurrences in his dreams too. So this is a great motivating factor for Anakin through the rest of the film to really alter his decision-making and motivations. Even though a lot of people criticize the line deliveries and some of the clunky writing of Star Wars Episode 3, you cannot beat the framing, the set design, the deep emotion and confliction in Anakin. Hayden Christensen really has the look nailed. And I think truly he could have had the part nailed too with better direction. Anakin references the little necklace that he gave to Padme from episode 1. It's neat that they tied that together from so long ago. Padme's fashion sense is definitely a lot more dialed back in episode 3. Episode 1, she had all kinds of extravagancy, being the queen of Naboo, and then in episode 2, lots and lots of other, just different fashion choices. But in episode 3, she's just a lot more simple. I think that's for the best. This film isn't meant to be very flashy or extravagant, very dark and brooding and simple. Anakin's promise to Padme further motivates him to make sure that he finds a way to keep her from dying, and that's a dangerous path. Her question to him about Obi-Wan being able to help them is a good one. I think Obi-Wan really should have somewhat, to an extent, gotten involved, but Anakin's got such a resentment towards him as a master and apprentice relationship that the very thought is disgusting to him. As Anakin comes to the Jedi Temple and communes with Yoda, he receives this counsel to let go of everything that he fears to lose. This is almost an impossibility, seeing as he's betrayed the Jedi Code to marry Padme in the first place. Now they've got a baby on the way. So, since attachments are forbidden, he's in quite a bit of a bind. I like the neat little conference room, meditation room that they have here. Although I think I personally would have closed the blinds a little more. I think the sunlight would drive me nuts. According to Yoda, what isn't a path to the dark side? There is a lot of debate on the validity of the views of the Jedi, and truly to break down whether their way of seeing things, their point of view, is accurate or flawed. I think in a lot of ways they're on the right track, but there's just something also that doesn't feel right about not being able to live your own life outside of the Jedi. It's interesting. But the cunning of the dark side is very evident here when we start to see the Jedi sense that something is very wrong. Obi-Wan mentions to Anakin that Palpatine will request his presence for an unknown reason. Palpatine, of course, mentions to Anakin at the very end of The Phantom Menace, Episode 1, that he will watch his career with great interest. So that really shows further in Episode 2, now Episode 3, how much he's been watching Anakin. He's been kind of in touch with him, making sure to make a point to see him every so often, check in with him, and make sure he goes full in on eventually making him a candidate for a Dark Apprentice. It really is a shame that Obi-Wan and the other Jedi didn't explore their feelings more deeply, or perhaps they were clouded by the darkness. Perhaps that was an intentional move by Palpatine to sort of murky the waters a little bit of the Force. Perhaps they weren't able to see it. I always like to speculate on these things. Chancellor Palpatine meets with Anakin here in his office. He really starts to go the way of most dictators. From history, we learn a lot of lessons from the past. Some dictators have an extremely subtle rise to power like Palpatine does, where they're elected more and more power as time goes on, especially through wartime, which is what's happening here. And at some point, that power just gets to be too much and it goes unchecked. And there's a lot of influence in this film of with Palpatine's rise to power and the regime that takes over the democracy. Lots of themes from real life, such as the Roman Empire and the French Revolution. Lucas also looked into Richard Nixon as an example of somebody trying to change the Constitution in order for him to gain a third term, as an example of somebody trying to overstep that power. The way that the Chancellor just assumes that he can create this new position as Anakin being his personal representative on the Jedi Council, and thinking that the Jedi will just, come as a council together and bow to the wishes of Palpatine by making Anakin a master is pretty silly. Anakin is still very naive of trusting of him. Perhaps he was too old to be trained as a Jedi, having certain biases and opinions, being a slave. He did not have a traditional growing up, and there's just something that does not work. His cunning arrogance is very apparent, and it's apparent in Palpatine as well. In fact, there's a deleted scene where Palpatine directly says he's going to take over the council, but it didn't end up getting used in the film. It still was pretty to the point and pretty clear of what his intentions were. He also directly tells Anakin that there will be some changes made to their constitution that he justifies needing to be done in order for him to gain more power. As Anakin meets with the Jedi Council, he is allowed to be on the Council, but ultimately he's not allowed to be made a master. This is the way the Jedi have found to appease the Chancellor, but also have their way as well. This is where Anakin really begins to resent them and to feel that the Chancellor has offered something very simple. It's the perfect way to start wedging himself into Anakin's heart by making him begin to hate the Jedi for how they treat him, quote unquote. And his pride begins to grow as he feels that since he's the chosen one and also one of the most powerful Jedi that's ever lived, that he should be a master. However, one does not earn that of your own accord. Anakin is really put in quite a position when Obi-Wan reveals to him that the only reason they appointed him to the council is that Obi-Wan trusts him and they want Anakin to use his close relationship with the Chancellor to spy on him for the Jedi because they have bad feelings about him. And Anakin feels that this is treasonous. But Obi-Wan explains that their allegiance is to the Senate, not to the Senate's leader, which is correct. They feel that he has overstepped his welcome and is using the Clone War as an excuse to stay in power. He's managed to stay in office longer than his term, which is definitely a very big red flag. And somehow Anakin just doesn't seem to understand that he's putting into place all of these moves politically that they're just not correct and they're not justified. From episode 1, as Palpatine moves to have a vote of no confidence in Chancellor Valorum, and he assumes his role instead. And then through episode 2, when Jar Jar Binks, in place of Padme Amidala while she's away, grants Palpatine the emergency powers that he wants to start the war. It's quite interesting to see how much power he just continues to grasp and fight for. And it's also really funny that Anakin feels that, going, to be a spy essentially is against the Jedi Code. And how concerned he is with that when he's really gone off and broke the Jedi Code anyway by having his attachments. As Obi-Wan, Mace Windu, and Yoda discuss how the meeting with Anakin went, giving him his new assignment, Yoda suggests that perhaps the Chosen One prophecy could have been misread. Perhaps Anakin may not bring balance to the Force in the way that they thought originally. And in fact, he's right. Little did they know that he would become a dark force that would bring the Jedi low and raise the Sith. In fact, by the end of this film, you'll see that the only Jedi left are Obi-Wan and Yoda, and the only Sith are Palpatine and Vader. 2 and 2 for each side. Of course, this is 2025, so now in new canon we have examples of Jedi who did survive Order 66, which I sort of look over because they're more apprentice types, such as Cal Kestis in the Jedi Fallen Order series of video games, and also another big example is Grogu, Baby Yoda from The Mandalorian. We're past the scene now where they're talking, but the quick shot of Yoda rubbing his head and on the ship is a direct reference to the film Seven Samurai, where the lead has his head shaved and is constantly rubbing his head. That was put in deliberately by the filmmakers. As Anakin returns home and discusses his assignment with Padme, you can really start to feel his darkness creeping in the way he speaks to her. There are some deleted scenes of Padme as they start talking together here about politics. They're sort of starting to polarize and go in different directions. Anakin towards more of the leanings of supporting the Chancellor with his emergency powers, and Padme really beginning to start to feel questioning. And like I said, there are some deleted scenes of Padme beginning to form the general roots and beginnings of the Rebel Alliance with Mon Mothma that sadly didn't make it into the film. George Lucas's daughter, Katie Lucas, is seen in those scenes as the blue-faced character Chi Ikwe. We previously saw her as Anakin and Obi-Wan landed with the Chancellor. The deleted scenes would have really explored the rebellion beginning to rise and be led by Mon Mothma and Bail Organa, and they're starting to notice how Padme is definitely a strong leader, so they sort of take her into their movement here. Actually, right here, George Lucas is seen with his daughters, two of them, and one of her daughters is talking to a friend. Of course, Padme will not live long. However, her legacy will live on with her daughter Leia as she's raised by Bail Organa in the rise of the Rebel Alliance. As we enter this opera scene, standing outside of the opera door, we did see a lot of different characters. The reason that George Lucas specifically wanted to make sure that he appeared with his daughters is that those deleted scenes with Padme and Mon Mothma and Bail Organa were ultimately cut. Another cameo that we can see is Anthony Daniels, none other than C-3PO, playing his human character, Captain Phaetoni. He wears a tall black hat, and we previously saw him in episode 2 in the cantina scene at the beginning on Coruscant. It's an opportunity for him to really show his face in a Star Wars film. Also, previously seen in Return of the Jedi in Jabba's palace is Rystal Sant, the dancing slave girl from Jabba's palace. The opera that plays in front of Anakin and Palpatine here is called Squid Lake, and it's performed by the Mon Calamari race, and it's of a duel between two different parties, which is a general large theme in this film. Lots of duels between two different parties. Palpatine mentions, as he talks to Anakin, the view of the Jedi being a certain point of view, which is a callback to what Obi-Wan tells Luke in Return of the Jedi as he's speaking with him on Dagobah as a Force ghost. Palpatine's true colors really start to come forth in this scene, and I love it. It's become a meme, to quote the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise to all your friends, and insert it into any social situation you can, but truly respecting it for what it is. It's an incredible piece of cinema. Ian McDiarmid is an incredible actor, certainly one of the best that's ever lived, and his line delivery is impeccably detailed, impeccably emotional, and I don't know how he does it. He is just incredibly perfect. What a villain. He's in fact my favorite villain of all time in any story. Sheev Palpatine truly is dark and sinister and does not hold back. We start to muse on the politics of the Jedi and the Sith and the light and the dark, and this really begins to cloud Anakin's visions of who he really is, and begins to show us that perhaps we've been led to believe things that aren't true about the Jedi. The story of Darth Plagueis, as Palpatine explains to Anakin, is actually about him and about his master, Darth Plagueis. He trained Darth Sidious, and I think it would be really cool if we someday got to explore this further. It'd be really neat to see them in a dark, epic film. There is a book out there that details the story of Darth Plagueis. I recommend that. The dark side of the Force is a pathway to tons of abilities that Anakin really, really, really wants, especially the ability to cheat death. He's an extreme master of seduction in this scene. Power struggles are truly a motivator in a lot of great tragedies, and certainly it is in this one. Palpatine mentions all who gain power are afraid to lose it, including the Jedi. He can see right through Anakin and his conflict. Whether Palpatine can straight up read minds or if he's just a true master manipulator, it's hard to say. However, he knows right off the bat that the Jedi have asked him to spy on him. This is the planet Kashyyyk, It's a very interesting thing to see within the Star Wars films, because the last time we saw this planet was in the Star Wars Holiday Special, which is a completely, I don't know if overlooked is the right word, but shunned piece of Star Wars history. It's the home planet of the Wookiees, so Chewbacca lives here, and in the Holiday Special, we saw Chewbacca's family celebrating Life Day, including his son, Lumpy. But we're not celebrating Life Day in this film. In fact, they have battle on their shores. Peter Mayhew is, of course, back as Chewbacca, who originally played him in the first trilogy. This is Chewie's earliest canonical appearance, as far as I'm aware. Chewie was born in the city of Rowuk. I don't know how to say that, on Kashyyyk. And the battle scene we've seen here in the movie is on the shores of Kachir Ho. Something I just learned recently is that Kashyyyk was actually supposed to be the planet that they fought on in Return of the Jedi, but instead they made it the forest moon of Endor, populated by creatures called Ewoks, because they wanted to have something that could be easily marketable to children for toys, because as we know, Star Wars toys are very profitable, and also it's rumored that they just didn't want to find the really, really tall actors to play a bunch of Wookiees. So now we get this scene in Revenge of the Sith, ultimately. There are a lot of CGI Wookiees in this, but the first few rows of that scene that just showed were actually physical, real Wookiee costumes, copy and pasted a few times, and then ultimately a bunch of CGI ones. When George Lucas was considering using Han Solo in this film as a 10-year-old boy, the idea was that he was going to be raised by the Wookiees with Chewbacca on Kashyyyk, so he would have been here in this scene helping Yoda. But ultimately, George felt that that was a bit stupid. He felt that he was trying to be a little too smart alecky with the story and trying to tie things together to be a little too clever for his own good. I do think that's a good move to not include Han in this film. We heard one of the Wookiees give a Tarzan yell that's kind of funny, and that's a callback to the Chewbacca Tarzan yell from Return of the Jedi on the Forest Moon of Endor. As Obi-Wan leaves for Utapau, here we have a quick moment of dialogue between he and Anakin. This is actually the last scene where they speak together as friends. And it's even very poignant. Obi-Wan says, "You are very strong and wise. Anakin, I am very proud of you. I've trained you since I was a small boy. Taught you everything I know, and you have become a far greater Jedi than I would ever hope to be, but be patient." I'm just reading the dialogue at this point, but it's just very, very touching. And as Anakin says, "Obi-Wan, may the Force be with you," and Obi-Wan replies, "Goodbye, old friend, may the Force be with you," it's enough to make a man cry. And off Obi-Wan goes. Friends parting ways. Lots of CGI clones in this scene. Of course, when I say that, I mean that Tamura Morrison did stand in for each of the clones, at least for the most part. But there were no clone armor costumes created for this film at all. It's very cryptic that the clones ask Obi-Wan, "Come on, have we ever let you down?" Because, well, they are about to. Little to the knowledge of the Jedi, of course. And here we go, as Obi-Wan blasts off to hunt down General Grievous. We have another nightmare. Padme is really, really experiencing a lot of pain in Anakin's dreams, and now Obi-Wan is there, and so that's really becoming an odd thing for Anakin. His fear of losing his wife and then his resentment towards Obi-Wan is only growing. As Anakin discusses with Padme all the thoughts he's experiencing and pondering, he expresses that he knows what he's doing. or about to do is wrong. It's not the Jedi way. However, he goes for it anyway. And it literally signifies where his values and morals are currently at. He is in an absolute beginning stage of lusting after power, giving into his attachments rather than doing what is right, according to the Jedi. And he's not even trying to stand up to the evil that he's beginning to form an alliance with, which is truly terrifying, that he's let his guard down so much and turned away so much from his teachings. The ironic thing about all this is that Palpatine's been influencing Anakin to have these dreams, a manufactured crisis. It's very similar, of course, to when he was dreaming about his mother before she died. So, of course, it's a natural, easy way for Palpatine to manipulate Anakin. I believe it has been confirmed that he is, in fact, manufacturing these dreams for him. Sort of a vision of the future, sort of a warning, but also just an easy way to plant the further seeds of discontent in Anakin. So here we are, Obi-Wan arriving on Utapau. We've seen this previously in the film already as General Grievous arrived, but now as Obi-Wan is hunting him down, he is about to get into a bit of trouble. As I said, it's designed to be a home of all manner of giant sinkholes. The leader that Obi-Wan meets up with here on Utapau is named Tion Medon. Kind of scary fellas. The lengthy animatic was created for this film in the Utapau sequence. And, of course, Ben Burt spearheaded that movement. Animatics were a really, really cool way to visualize your film. And they use that heavily here in Revenge of the Sith. Steven Spielberg actually was brought on site a few times to help George Lucas craft certain aspects of the film. And, of course, they're good buddies, making Indiana Jones together and doing all sorts of collaborative work. He's very good at making action scenes and action movies. So he helped George Lucas kind of nail down some things as Obi-Wan comes to battle General Grievous. And he also wanted to learn about the process of animatics and offer some guidance and opinions to George, in addition to learning about this new process. Whereas R4-P17 got damaged previously in the battle over Coruscant at the beginning of the film, Obi-Wan, I guess, now has a new droid with a golden head named R4-G9. It's funny because I always assumed in the past that this was our original R4, just with a brand new head, but I've recently learned that it's actually a whole new astromech companion. I truly don't know how Obi-Wan pulled that fake out off, but with his ship leaving, I wonder if it was a sort of projection trick that we've seen in other films. One of the really fun things being a child during the time that the prequels came out was just the ongoing new takes on all the lightsaber battles. Previously, of course, we've seen the double-bladed saber with Darth Maul, dual wielding with Count Dooku, and now they've even they've even gotten quadrupled the fun with General Grievous. I remember being a little blown away by General Grievous when I was a kid, seeing his forearms whip out the lightsabers here in a minute with Obi-Wan's, about to fight him. These days, I find that's a little goofy. Being an adult, I kind of see how impractical that method of saber fighting would be. How the heck is he not cutting himself into a million pieces as he's flinging his lightsabers around? It's a little crazy. Especially since he gets so many limbs chopped off right away from Obi-Wan. He's a formidable foe, but of course he's not a Force user. He says he's been trained in the Jedi arts by Count Dooku, but Obi-Wan is certainly a bit of a, step up in terms of skill. Obi-Wan's jumped down and saying hello there to General Grievous is a direct callback to when Alec Guinness says hello there in the original Star Wars film to Luke, R2-D2, and C-3PO on Tatooine. And it's just a further connection as we transition from the prequels to the original trilogy, connecting him to Alec Guinness. General Grievous was originally supposed to have a reveal of his forearms in the film, but unfortunately that got spoiled before the film's release. So it wasn't a giant surprise, unfortunately. This reveal would have been pretty shocking. General Grievous is a former Kaleesh warlord. He gets very touchy when anyone calls him a droid because he really isn't. He's greatly damaged, and he's still a Kaleesh with a droid shell. This is obviously a foreshadowing of what will happen to Anakin as Darth Vader, as he becomes more machine than man. General Grievous was in a shuttle crash and nearly on the brink of death, had to be rebuilt by Geonosian biotech. And this is something that Darth Sidious kept a close eye on with great interest. He seems to do that a lot. The shuttle crash in question is rumored to have been orchestrated by Darth Tyrannus, aka Count Dooku. Reportedly, he was secretly humiliated at having been resurrected as a cyborg, according to the Visual Dictionary. He is a strong warlord, but neither a Jedi, Sith, Force-sensitive, anything of that manner. He's simply just received that training by Count Dooku. And to what extent that is, I'm not actually sure. Obi-Wan rides around on a giant lizard. I truly don't know if this is intentional or if it's just me, but I always kind of find it funny that the boga lizard that Obi-Wan rides on sounds like it's yipping and saying, Obi-Wan? The lizard creature is Varactyl, and of course named Boga. Get a really interesting close-up of General Grievous's Kaleesh eyes, truly showcasing his creature side. Originally, George wanted the giant lizard to be ridden by Anakin Skywalker in some fashion, some form. That was an original vision he had for this film. He even had plans to make a giant sculpture of Anakin riding the Boga Varactyl out in Skywalker Ranch, right in the middle, to be kind of like a neat focal point. But of course, that never happened. Obi-Wan truly has a crazy chase ahead of him. It's really neat to see the scope of this planet. They actually had a really cool miniature set built for the Utapau sinkhole that they did a lot of filming in, but of course most of this is CGI. A great irony is that Obi-Wan is always harping on Anakin in the previous film to not lose his lightsaber, but here he is, dropping his own after he's shaking around like a rag doll on the Boga. Here in the Hologram Council, we've got Yoda, Ki-Adi-Mundi, Ayla Secura, and a clone trooper, meeting with Mace Windu and Anakin. Fun fact about Ki-Adi-Mundi is that he's actually got a large head because he's got a second heart in there in the bulge of his head, and it nourishes his large brain, so he's very good at strategic warfare and making decisions. Here in this council, though, Mace Windu admits that he senses a darkness surrounding the Chancellor, and they're very, very concerned at this point. And I think it's becoming a bit more apparent to them that something is truly wrong. It's, again, just unfortunate that they weren't able to see it sooner. Yoda senses everything, too. In this shot, we see that Palpatine has a quick screen up as Anakin walks in on him, and it looks suspiciously like plans for a battle station. This hologram, of course, is a plan that has been developed and was hinted at in the previous film, Attack of the Clones, as a plan for an upcoming Death Star that will begin materializing by the end of this film and be fully operational by the next film, A New Hope. Palpatine admits that his mentor taught him everything he knows, even the nature of the dark side. This, of course, is Darth Plagueis he's referring to from his explanation of the story to Anakin earlier at the opera. Anakin's distrust of the Jedi is only furthering. Palpatine's office is full of interesting, very simple furniture, large urns, very reminiscent of dark themes of reds and blacks and grays, golds, very themed. There's a giant frieze on the wall that depicts a hyperspace war. And this was created by the Masasi people, who are the ones who also created the temple on the rebel base of Yavin 4. A piece that depicts the great struggle between the dark and the light sides is an interesting piece to have in his office. It's actually a Sith artifact that depicts Sith superiority. Palpatine actually created Anakin through the Force. He references creating life by manipulating midichlorians with the dark side of the Force earlier at the opera. And in fact, Anakin is a direct result of that. And it's interesting that Palpatine knows about Anakin and Padme's marriage. It's revealed in the visual dictionary that Captain Panaka, who is the former head of security for Queen Amidala, gave Palpatine this information previously. One of the creepiest moments truly is when Palpatine reveals that he knows Anakin is worried about his wife and his dreams of her certain death, and then he gives him that smile. It's truly chilling. Palpatine's intentions and allegiances are truly made clear here in this scene, and it's amazing that Anakin still doesn't act on that. He's worried so much about his wife and the attachments he's got. He just can't bring himself to even arrest Palpatine. The twisting and turning of the logic here is truly, I don't know, I'd say it's really, really good writing on George's part. The way he crafted the small steps of Anakin's conversion and fall. I do think that the dialogue is rather clunky in some places, but the overall writing is very well done. Always loved General Grievous's motorbike thing. It's a really neat design, and I like the way that it sounds. The sound design by Ben Bird is always incredible. However, I do feel that the Utapau battle sequence goes on just a hair too long. But here is the final climax of Obi-Wan's involvement with Grievous. Neat to see him wield a Magna Guard staff. Although I do have a bit of issue with the Magna Guard staff not being able to be broken by a lightsaber. Although, from what I understand, they're made of frick alloy, which is kind of similar to Mandalorian Beskar. It's a material known for lightsaber resistance. We get a quick little peek at Grievous's insides, which is truly creepy. And I always find it interesting that Obi-Wan eventually gets General Grievous taken down by shooting him right in the gut. Shooting him with a gun, of course, which he mentions is how uncivilized it is. This is a callback to the original Star Wars film, where he explains to Luke that a lightsaber is an elegant weapon for a more civilized age. You really start to feel the connection with Alec Guinness and his dialogue and his mannerisms. And what a fiery end for Grievous, my goodness. Another little bit of foreshadowing of Anakin in the fire. And with that, the war should be over. Mace Windu here makes things very clear that Anakin's judgments have been clouded by fear, and he knows that'll lead him to the dark side, so having him stay behind is definitely good advice. Don't get involved with the arrest. now that General Grievous is taken down, the war should be ending. They need to go have Palpatine give up his powers, otherwise he will be arrested. The Jedi are about to take matters into their own hands, which truly does not make Palpatine happy. The story has to play out in a certain way. There's no way of getting around the fact that Anakin will become Darth Vader, but it always still bothers me that Mace Windu didn't try to detain Anakin here, and instead of just instructing him to stay, he could have saved his own life as well as the lives of many others, or even have some other task for Anakin to do to sort of distract him. Instead, he allows Anakin to feel stuck and ultimately come and get involved. Few missteps along the road to Anakin's fall. We are about the halfway point of the film here as we feel a deep tone shift. Anakin and Padme are looking out across Coruscant. Once they stand up, they'll be looking facing each other towards their home and to the Jedi Temple. And it's a really, really interesting piece of music that's playing. I really, really enjoy, I believe it's called Padme's Ruminations, that truly is haunting and terrifying. Their lives are about to be absolutely destroyed based off a few small mistakes that Anakin's about to make that ultimately lead to changing the course of the entire galaxy for the worse, in addition to their own lives being completely destroyed. Padme, of course, is doomed to die in the process, and Anakin as well, as he succumbs to his new fate as Darth Vader. The confliction here in Hayden Christensen's acting is truly, truly just perfect. And Natalie Portman is also an incredible actress, portraying such love and heartbreak. Anakin just cannot contain himself, so off he goes. We've seen Palpatine's apprentices before wielding their dark power, but never before have we seen such a dark power as Darth Sidious. As Darth Sidious absolutely annihilates these Jedi that are here to arrest him and mows down Mace Windu with the help of Anakin, it's all a bit reminiscent of Darth Maul taking down the great Jedi Qui-Gon Jinn in The Phantom Menace here, as Palpatine mows down Aegon Kolar, Saesee Tiin, and Kit Fisto before entering into his duel with Mace Windu. If you ever have a second, Google what Emperor Palpatine's lightsaber looks like, because it's very interesting. It's a very light-colored blade with gold on the end, and I think it's really cool looking. I actually really want a prototype version of it or a toy. It looks awesome. Not to mention, gotta love that red color. I do think that red is one of the coolest lightsaber colors, even though it is the bad guys. Fun fact, a lot of people simply refer to Mace's lightsaber color as purple, but officially its color is amethyst. And it's so unique. I love that he wanted it to be that color. Sam Jackson really wanted purple. It's just crazy. The irony is completely lost on Anakin continually, especially here, as he's previously killed somebody, a Dark Lord of the Sith, Count Dooku, and now he's using the Jedi Code against Mace Windu to do the ultimate power move of keeping the Chancellor alive for his judgment. Anakin's judgment truly has been clouded by darkness. His earlier guilt from killing Count Dooku, just really is just forgotten. He's a completely different person than he was that day. Mace is about to arrest Palpatine, but then sort of changes his tune as the Force lightning gets whipped out, because he's demonstrated to be truly dangerous. Mace Windu's in the exact same position that Anakin was only a few days previous with Count Dooku, as Mace Windu says that Palpatine is way too dangerous to be kept alive. This rationale makes Anakin retaliate against him, even though Palpatine used that justification with Anakin earlier. It's absolutely crazy. George Lucas has a really interesting quote. He says, "Nobody thinks of themselves as bad, not even the worst people, and they rationalize their behavior to say that we are doing good by killing all these people." With the use of the Force lightning, Dr. Jekyll is truly gone and Mr. Hyde is here to stay. We only get quick glimpses of the Emperor in the original trilogy, and he's always covered by his hood for the most part. Here we truly see why he looks the way he does. He's been damaged and wrinkled beyond repair. Mace Windu's death here in this scene where he's confronting Palpatine is such a emotional scene, and honestly, Mace Windu is one of the only prominent Jedi that George Lucas had the option of killing off, so he got a really spectacular death scene. They really wanted to make it realistic looking and very, very memorable. So they actually had Sam Jackson jump out of the window balcony of the set and onto a mat with no harness. Sometimes they would have harnesses in certain scenes, but in this one, they just had him jump out. Wasn't too far from the ground. His reaction to being told that was, "Okay, I like that, fantastic." They made it really fun for him, and Sam Jackson even said, "I feel pretty great about that whole fight scene. I've been waiting for a scene like that my entire life, ever since I was a young man pretending to be an Errol Flynn-like swashbuckler, fighting with sticks. It's amazing." Close quote. With the death of Mace Windu and Anakin's decision made, he begins his initiation as Darth Vader, leaving behind his former self and taking on a new evil. Palpatine is truly horrific in this scene, and I cannot believe the level of acting that Ian McDiarmid is constantly at. Speaking about the earlier opera, Ian McDiarmid continues his performance as an insidiously provocative Palpatine. He's a veteran stage performer, and he likens the Chancellor to Shakespeare's Prospero in The Tempest. He says, "I've played other monsters too," he notes. "Count Sensi is almost as monstrous as Palpatine. He's diabolical in every sense. His daughter kills him by driving nails through his eyes." Hayden Christensen, speaking of Ian, says, "Ian does such an amazing job of playing the puppet master. He pulls each string with such charming yet evil precision." Ian McDiarmid, speaking of Hayden Christensen, says, "I like Hayden very much, and he's a fine actor. You know that when you're working with somebody, eyeball to eyeball, over several very tightly shot scenes, he's a wonderful listener and everything passes across his face. As Palpatine, I'm having to look very closely in those eyes and see what emotions are going on to manipulate him. And every take I would get something different from Hayden to use as raw material. It was enormously exciting to work with him. It's interesting that in the previous film, not everyone understands his behavior, and his behavior isn't particularly understandable. But I think in Episode 3, a lot of people will look back and understand why his character behaved as he does in Episode 2. He's a confused young man, to put it mildly." Close quote. Hayden Christensen continues, "Anakin's very conflicted and being pulled in different directions. Palpatine is picking up on some of his frustrations and his wants and needs. George Lucas, speaking of essentially the entire plot of this film, he says it's basically Faust in the end. This is the one where you make a pact with the devil, and that usually leads to the same end. You cannot change the inevitable. If you try, you're basically going against the cosmos, or however you want to define that. Close quote. It's truly spooky how Anakin makes a pact with the devil. His whole goal is to find a power that will help save his wife from death. And in turn, Anakin sells his soul to this man who offers no real guarantee that that is going to happen. He throws away everything for power. A power that isn't even guaranteed. His instructions to go wipe out the Jedi and wipe out the Viceroy and the other leaders at Mustafar are very, very dark deeds, and they truly will usher in a new empire. This film gets a lot of hate for line delivery. However, Ian McDiarmid's line delivery as the Emperor here, as he speaks of having peace in his new empire, is truly horrific. Absolutely incredible filmmaking and acting. March on the Jedi Temple is start of it all. The Great Jedi Purge. And you cannot praise enough John Williams' incredible score as they're marching towards the Jedi Temple and across all the different planets, having Order 66 put into place. And across the whole film and series of films too, John Williams really brings Star Wars a lot of heart and a lot of emotion. Anakin's march on the Jedi Temple is truly one of the most epic scenes in all of Star Wars history, and especially this movie. The Jedi Purge is an incredible tragedy. Never before have we seen a Sith be knighted as Anakin was here, with Darth Sidious as Darth Vader. Since being knighted, Anakin receiving that new name means that he will forever now change the course of Star Wars for the rest of its chronological history. At the end of a fairly tense meeting about pre-production for the film, George Lucas actually joked that what will eventually turn Anakin ultimately to the dark side is that it'll be Padme. She'll get so angry at him for not picking up his socks. That's a pretty funny, lighthearted moment, and it's fun to see that the crew was able to joke around and have a lot of fun. Of course, the Jedi are mowed down across the entire galaxy as a result of the Order 66 given by Palpatine, the Emperor. We've got Ki-Adi-Mundi here getting slaughtered on Maigito. Silas Carson actually has 2 deaths as the first one, since he plays Newt Gunray. This is Ayla Secura's execution scene on the beautiful planet Felucia. I love playing on this planet during Battlefront 2, the original game. Such a fun game, by the way, because we don't really get to explore this planet very much. Of course, Yoda's still on Kashyyyk, and he's starting to feel the disturbance in the Force, as Obi-Wan did in the original film when Alderaan was blown up. Definitely great disturbance. Plo Koon is seen here executed over the planet Cato Nemoidia, which is the planet where Newt Gunray and the Viceroy are from. Get a very, very brief glimpse at their planet. And then here is Stas Ali on the planet Salukami, who also dies. I don't know if I pronounced any of that correctly, but hopefully you know who I mean. I've always thought that this was Adigalia, but actually they're just very similar looking characters. Here on the planet Kashyyyk, we've got a giant tank. This tank is actually a really cool design that was taken from the original trilogy and used for this film. It's a 10-wheeler tank, and definitely is really neat to look at, finally being used. Of course, Yoda is very in tune with the Force and knows that something extremely fishy is going on, but I've heard a lot of people say how funny it must be for Chewbacca and Tarful to be like, what the crap did Yoda just do? They, of course, have no idea what's going on either. The slaughtering of the Jedi, and especially the children apprentices here, is really essential to the film to really show how far Anakin has gone, seeing as we started with Anakin as a young child in the first film, The Phantom Menace, and now he's become this monster, Darth Vader. The young boy that he speaks with here in the scene looks a lot like young Anakin. I think that was intentional. A bit reminiscent of the past being destroyed. George Lucas actually was an assistant on the film The Godfather, a little film you may have heard of. And this whole massacre of the Jedi and the Trade Federation later is a scene partly established and inspired by The Godfather, when during the baptism scene, those who were challenging the power structure in the Godfather family get killed. In addition to playing Jango Fett in the previous film and Boba Fett in the future and the clones in the prequels, Tamura Morrison actually plays a background Jedi here at the temple. The Jedi, son of Bail Organa, who comes out swinging against these clone troopers, is named Zet Jukasa and is actually the son of George Lucas, Jet Lucas. It's truly horrifying that after slaughtering children at the Jedi Temple and having his way with them, Anakin goes straight home in a bit to double check to see if Padme and the baby are safe. What a monster. Nick Gillard, in talking about General Grievous fighting Obi-Wan a couple times, says that originally he fought with an electrified power staff, but about 3 weeks before we were going to shoot it, George decided he would have 4 arms and a lightsaber in each arm. Obviously, we could handle 2 arms, but the extra 2 were difficult. In the end, we decided to cut off 2 of his arms quite quickly. As these clones are scouting around, you can actually hear a version of the Imperial March that's extremely peppy and victorious. Here is Yoda's goodbye to Chewbacca and Tarful. George Lucas really feels that Peter Mayhew was Chewbacca. It's very unique the way he has created the character, he says, the way he walks and the way he tilts his head, the way he looks, the way he uses his eyes. You just know it's Peter. Peter Mayhew says, I think the mere fact that not many characters from the original trilogy have come back, and me being one of them, is a remarkable situation. I haven't worn that costume for 14 years. Get in, put it on, Chewie becomes a character again. And boy, do we love him. We get the legendary 10T4 ship returned in this film, which is another great bookend tying into A New Hope. We have Bail Organa with Captain Antilles. These clones definitely assume that Obi-Wan is long gone. How could anyone have survived that fall? So this is his great escape. It must be so confusing to have all the clones turn on you. In the scenes on Bail Organa's ship, Star Wars fans know that beneath the helmet of the bounty hunter Boba Fett is actor Jeremy Bullock. But in this film, Bullock is on the side of the heroes, playing a pilot on Bail Organa's space cruiser in the cockpit, which is on certain scenes of the film. A little bit hard to see him. Lucas decided to put Bullock in the film, and he really wanted just a very small role for him to have. It seemed like the best choice for him. As George says now, he's more than just a mysterious conundrum. We see C-3PO in a few places during this film. This is one of the shiniest he's ever been, and as sometimes he doesn't have his gold plating on, or sometimes his gold plating is just really scuffed and dirty. And in fact, one of the only comparable scenes to how he looks in Revenge of the Sith throughout this is the end scene of A New Hope. This created a challenge for the filmmakers as they had to constantly edit the shots because he was reflecting the crew in every shot. And it was a bit hard for Anthony Daniels to see where he was going in the suit sometimes. A couple times he actually fell, and one was almost in a very precarious spot off the set. But thankfully someone was able to rush up and help him. Anthony Daniels said, "I walk forward and the world changes." He exclaims, noting that he got his foot caught. "Because I'm top heavy, I tumbled and it made a terrible sound in the suit. I heard George call out, 'Tony, are you all right?' because he saw my golden butt staring up." This is, of course, Anakin and Padme's last scene together as loving husband and wife, although, of course, he is completely lying to Padme. She can really sense that something is off, and it's quite tragic. Of course, I wonder what R2-D2 is saying here and trying to warn 3PO about. Yeah, I just saw him kill kids. Obi-Wan reunites with Bail Organa, safe from the clone troopers. It's truly a fascinating thing to see them walk down this hallway. It's such an iconic area of the first Star Wars film that everyone will immediately recognize. It's truly no wonder that Princess Leia is ultimately given to the care of the Organas, since Bail Organa had such a strong relationship with Obi-Wan Kenobi and always wanted a daughter, as he expresses later in this film. It's really neat to see them walking along and discussing the current events together. I think of the line that Princess Leia says in her hologram in R2-D2's memory files to Luke about how Obi-Wan served her father in the Clone Wars. Of course, the message is for Obi-Wan, not Luke, I should say. The legendary Mustafar is finally seen on screen in this film. This planet was an original concept, of course, by George Lucas in the days before any of the films were made. Ralph McQuarrie did a very iconic concept drawing of what that would look like, and this, of course, is ultimately where Darth Vader will have his castle in the future that isn't seen until the films Rogue One, A Star Wars Story, and The Rise of Skywalker briefly. George Lucas took his chance to use the Emperor and make an additional change to The Empire Strikes Back, utilizing Ian McDiarmid in the makeup as the character of the Emperor to reshoot a scene, inserting him instead of Clive Revel as the Emperor, as he's talking with Darth Vader, in order to have some continuity with the series. You can see that completed scene in the special edition of The Empire Strikes Back. Lucas says, "We're replacing the other actor with Ian, so we have the same actor in all films, so we have some continuity. The one scene featuring Darth Vader and the Emperor in that 1980 film is being reshot with McDiarmid, who took on the role in Return of the Jedi. The new footage will be cut into the DVD and all subsequent versions of Empire. The dialogue has also been altered so that it makes more sense with the continuity established in the prequel trilogy. Ian McDiarmid, reflecting on playing Emperor Palpatine, says, "The extraordinary thing is that I was an actor in his 40s playing someone around 110 in Return of the Jedi, of course." And he says, "And then to go back and be my own age and play the character at an age contemporaneous to mine is extraordinary. It's a very retrospective journey. I now have the benefit of hindsight and foresight. It's a unique thing in the history of acting." Coming into the scene where Anakin slaughters the Viceroy and the Trade Federation people truly shows that a reorganization is happening within the power structure and the governments at play in this film. And over back towards the Jedi Temple, as Anakin has done his dirty work, Obi-Wan and Yoda are coming in to see what the heck's happening, fight off some clones, and investigate the cause. Some beautiful scenery of the buildings. As Anakin walks away from R2-D2, it's a very sad moment, as he instructs him to stay with the ship, which is never something that's happened before to R2. You can see he's visibly upset about that. However, it's probably best that he doesn't be a part of the events that are about to occur with the murders. The Emperor has officially gained enough power that he reforms the Senate into the First Galactic Empire here in a few moments. And this is significant because the rise of the Empire and its reign is a dark tyranny that shrouds the galaxy over the course of the next several years, really, several decades. It must be truly horrific to see the damage done here in the Jedi Temple, and how incomprehensible it must be that Anakin has fallen so far. It's truly a tragedy. If you look very closely at some of the represented symbolism in this film, for example, you can see closely Padme's headdress that she wears is reminiscent of the winged crest of the Rebel Alliance, and later there will be some additional symbolism. Anakin's creepy eyes are truly on fire in this scene. The Emperor, of course, is supposed to be reminiscent of various dictators throughout the years I may have mentioned, such as Hitler and Mussolini, the Axis through World War II, and various other horrible, horrible dictators throughout our history. Padme's got that very iconic line here that this is how liberty dies, with thunderous applause. Newt Gunray finally is at his demise, and this is, as I mentioned, Silas Carson's second death in this film. Poor guy got killed twice. Back at the Jedi Temple, Yoda and Obi-Wan are investigating the transmission that's sent out to call all of the Jedi back, and as they disable it, they discuss what is to be done. This series of the library in the Jedi Temple of records is supposed to be very, very futuristic and technologically advanced, and the design of it was actually taken from a bunch of stacks of DVDs. As Obi-Wan and Yoda review the holograms here in the Jedi Temple of the security recordings of Darth Vader slaughtering the Jedi, you can actually see him take down a Jedi instructor and two younglings, a Jedi instructor and two younglings played by Nick Gillard, who is the famous stunt coordinator and lightsaber expert on the prequel trilogy. He even got to name his character, which is his own name backwards, which is Sindralig, or Kindralig, however you say it. Nick Gillard has been the wonderful and absolutely skilled lightsaber instructor on the sets of the prequel trilogy, and he was actually on set first on Return of the Jedi. He had just become a stuntman. Mark Hamill, as Luke Skywalker, actually wanted him to be his stunt double, but he didn't have the correct requirements to be able to do something like that yet. Here, Yoda explains to Obi-Wan that Anakin is gone and that it really must be Obi-Wan to kill him because Anakin no longer exists. He's been consumed by the darkness. Overcoming Anakin is truly something that Obi-Wan can do because, it makes sense. He was the one that trained him. He would know his every move and his skill set. So the unfortunate aspect of that is he knows him the best. And he is not well enough equipped to battle the Emperor himself. According to the Revenge of the Sith visual dictionary, Obi-Wan is not actually without his secrets. As he comes up to Padme and is discussing with her about Anakin's actual turn to the dark side and secret things that he's been keeping from her, it's interesting to learn that Obi-Wan actually had a relationship with a Jedi named Siri Tachi, who died saving Padme. I am fairly new to this information, and I wasn't really aware of who the heck this was or any of the events surrounding it, but I'm going to be researching that and trying to figure out if I can learn some more about this event. Obi-Wan is mystified by Anakin's attachment to R2-D2, and even more by the astromech's apparent attachment to Anakin, for example. But the funny thing is that Obi-Wan has an attachment as well. It's just kind of odd, and I almost wonder if this is accurate. But it's sure enough in the visual dictionary. Padme's realization that Obi-Wan is supposed to go find him and kill him is extremely jarring and conflicting for sure, and it makes her so distraught that she's got to go after him and see what the heck is going on, as she does here in a moment. Obi-Wan's suspicions all along have been correct, that Padme has fathered this child with Anakin, and it just makes it all the more tragic. Anakin's own blindness and lust for power has really brought him to this point of, has he made the correct choice? I think he truly believes that the Jedi are out for him and that they've been wrong all along now, and he's looking to find his place in the universe as Grand Ruler alongside the Emperor. The one single tear coming down his cheek really shows the goodness that still does lie within him. He knows what he's doing is wrong ultimately, but his lust for power is too strong, and the dark side is too seductive. Threepio's little arm wave. She says, "Threepio will look after me." It's always so funny. His anxiety is always through the roof. Poor Threepio. Extremely emotional scene for Padme here. Natalie Portman really did a great job. The scene here where Obi-Wan must hide in a utility closet. There was an on-set joke that R2-D2 would walk by and hear someone banging on the door who can't get out. George Lucas joked, but R2 moves on. And then Ewan McGregor even offered, "Or I disappear into this small cupboard where they keep the mops. Light years later, I emerge as Alec Guinness." As the jokes continued, they inadvertently revealed that closet is mysteriously and unrealistically empty of objects. So Lucas, Peter Russell, and art director David Lee quickly came up with something to make it more lived in. A few minutes later, the closet contains some air conditioner hose and a few plastic containers on set. Ewan's idea was that he would try the little Jedi thing with his hand when he's inside, and he says to close the door. George Lucas agreed. It's a nice touch. For the planet Mustafar here, a lot of that was actually miniature set. It was a huge set. Funny that miniatures are often called bigatures because they're so big. But there was a lot of really cool effects added to the lava and, of course, to the just surrounding environment. Roger Guyette from the crew said, "We had 8 months on the Mustafar miniatures. I believe it was the longest single miniature shoot in ILM's history. There was every sort of setup, and they were all immensely complicated." George Lucas gives a little more context about Mustafar. He describes that Mustafar has been around a long time. I've always had this set piece, the end between Obi-Wan and Anakin. I knew that that's where this movie was going to end up. It's all this volcanic lava shooting up, so it's almost monochromatic in its red and blackness. I've had that image with me for a long time. On November 1st, 2002, it's recorded in the Star Wars archives that earlier this week, when Lucas heard the news that Sicily's Mount Etna was erupting, he called Rick McCallum and said that Ron Fricke should go over there and go film it. Rick arranged for a local guide and the approval of the Italian government. He ended up going out there and renting a camera, getting some really cool, nice reference shots of the volcano's eruption. And it was really neat. They were able to use a lot for reference, but at the same time, they were able to incorporate a lot of real life elements and incorporate it into the CGI imagery, as well as adding it to the miniature set digitally later. Willie Geiger, who is a digital sequence supervisor, along with Brian Gernand and his team, made a beautiful 1x132 scale model of the lava river valley of Mustafar. Roger Guyette said that we used methacel, a food additive, for the lava river, colored it, and lit it from underneath the perspex base because lava emits light. Willie Geiger said they poured the gloopy methacel into the top of the model, sprinkled burnt cork as they poured, and as if they got it just right with the lighting underneath, it looked like a flowing river of lava. That was the starting point for pretty much every shot. Brian Gernand, who is a practical model supervisor, said, "In real life, cooling lava is a bright orange, while hotter lava is bright yellow. We designed our sets so that the lava would flow at different depths. When the methacel moved into the deeper areas, it magically turned a burnt orange because of the volume. When it was out in the edges where it was more shallow, it was thinner and bright yellow. We learned that the crust was the most important thing in making lava look realistic. We added a binder to it to make crust pieces clump together at the bottom of the set, bunching up around pinnacles and into corners, just as it does on real lava as the movement slows." It's really neat that they were able to accomplish all that and make it look so good. This, of course, is one of the most important emotional scenes in the entire film. Anakin's own blindness and his narcissism is beyond control at this point. He is absolutely beyond reason, to the point that he would kill his own wife and unborn child. It's truly disturbing to see him fall so hard. He plays this victim when everything that's happening to him is all his doing and his choice. His anger and his lust for power, as Obi-Wan says, have truly ruined his life. Hayden Christensen says Anakin's just gone and killed his family, more or less, so I've done a deed that I thought would have weighed on me. He said this the following day, but George sees it as an outburst of almost accidental anger that Anakin then has to suffer the repercussions of for the rest of his life. Anakin thinks he's done the right thing in killing all the Jedi. So George wanted me to come up to the scene with enthusiasm. Things are good. I'm the most powerful man in the universe, and I'm going to be able to save Padme. Close quote. Me, one of my most favorite memories growing up before episode 3 came out, is that my dad was very knowledgeable about Star Wars. He had never seen the films until he was an adult, but he saw the special editions in theaters, and then, of course, would go on to see the prequels. I got to see the episode 1 with him and my family, but beyond that, I wasn't sure what was going to happen in the series, but my dad had listened to a lot of interviews with George Lucas and done a lot of reading about what was to come for the prequel trilogy. So I knew that Anakin eventually was going to become Darth Vader long before episode 3 came out. So the whole trilogy leading to that event, of course. That being said, I knew that he was most likely going to be the cause of Padme's death in some form or another. And sure enough, he doesn't kill her right then and there, but he is the cause. He breaks her heart, he weakens her with the choking, and she's pregnant, so that's going to make some complications. So a fun memory I have, I remember playing with an Attack of the Clones coloring book. I was at my grandma's house at a family party one evening years and years ago, definitely pre-2005, but sometime after Attack of the Clones came out, of course. And I remember coloring, just sitting there in the kitchen, and my grandma came up and commented, "Oh, are you enjoying your coloring book?" Something along those lines. And I was coloring a picture of Anakin and Padme, and I said, "Yeah, but it is really sad that one day he will kill her." And the look of shock on my grandma's face is something I'll never forget. I don't think she exactly told me off or anything, but I think she was kind of like, "That doesn't happen. What are you talking about?" And I just thought that was funny. I was just like, "No, trust me." I doubt she remembers that, but it's a funny thing to look back on. And as Anakin propositions Padme to join him and rule the galaxy, that's a scene that's reminiscent and kind of a callback of when Vader also extends the same proposition to his son Luke in Return of the Jedi. Of course, he does that in Empire Strikes Back as well. He propositions Luke twice, as well as the Emperor, who tries to gain Luke's allegiance. The dialogue hits a little clunky, I feel, in the scenes where Anakin and Padme are talking, and again, I do think that's the fault of George Lucas, but despite all that, I still think the scene hits very powerfully. I do wish that George would have coached Anakin to say things a little more skillfully, meaning that George needed the skill, not Hayden. It could have been refined and enhanced and played a little better. And the fight choreography done for this film is absolutely mesmerizing. Hayden and Ewan McGregor are truly that fast in real life, as many can attest to, especially Nick Gillard and George Lucas, and they themselves. They were able to train and get so good at the moves and the lightsaber skills that they didn't even have to do anything. They just said, "Go at it." The funny thing, though, is Hayden Christensen and Ewan McGregor were constantly hitting each other. Hayden even comments that he had scarred knuckles from the reshoots, and Ewan had them too. The lightsabers became somewhat of a liability. So he said you have to be 100% present at all times when you're doing the fights. You have to be on your stuff. Though a master of the Jedi lightsaber style known as Ataru, in which deflection is prized above aggression, Obi-Wan's true style is Soresu, which encourages a practitioner to place himself at the eye of the storm. Soresu is well served by Obi-Wan's innate capacity for patience and perception, but the key to mastery is audacity, a talent he has learned from Anakin. So it's really neat to see them both go at it. In Anakin's flair for the dramatic and his disregard for the rules, Obi-Wan finds troubling echoes of Qui-Gon Jinn. Although Obi-Wan's student, Anakin helped mold his master into the great Jedi Qui-Gon, always thought Obi-Wan might be. And this is ironic when Kenobi is forced to fight his own apprentice, whom Qui-Gon ordered to be trained in the Jedi arts to begin with. Absolutely mesmerizing fight scenes. And how interesting they were able to get Yoda and Palpatine, two extremely old, wizened Force wizards, to come up against each other, especially since A lot of that has to be stuntmen and CGI. I wish that fight was a little more elaborate, but I can understand why it would be challenging. So I think what they've done was pretty good. The fight in the Senate chamber is crazy. It's an absolute visual representation of the Republic's crumbling. They're literally destroying the Senate chambers. It's a really striking visual that they're literally destroying the room where their system of government once ruled the galaxy, and now they're literally destructive of the democracy and the rule of law that was before and now is the mercy of the evil empire. I love this, that in addition to the great new theme, Battle of the Heroes, that John Williams taps into the score he composed for The Phantom Menace with Duel of the Fates and weaves them together so well to call back to the themes that have really truly defined the prequel trilogy and bring it all together in a nice bow. The funny thing Nick Gillard mentions about Obi-Wan and Anakin is that they did have really good stunt doubles for them. Two really great guys, but they rarely got to do any work because the boys did it pretty much themselves. Their fighting has evolved considerably in the last 3 movies, according to Nick Gillard. There's a couple quotes from him that are very similar. He says, George works on a system of skill levels. Yoda is a level 9, Darth Sidious is a level 9, Mace Windu is a level 8. On Phantom Menace, Obi-Wan was a level 6 or 7. On this film, he's moved up to level 8, which affects his style of fighting. Anakin in Attack of the Clones was a level 7. In this film, he has moved up to a level 9. He's gone past Obi-Wan, and the difference is because of the dark side. Even though Yoda is a level 9, it's controlled. His other quote is, as they approach the end of the climactic battle between Obi-Wan and Anakin, Gillard explains how he's rated the various Star Wars swordsmen. On Attack of the Clones, I had to give them levels, he says. Sidious is a level 9 out of 10 on this film. Obi's an 8, he's moved up. Anakin is a 9. Mace is a 9, Yoda's a 9. They're up with Sidious. Once you get to 8, you have a Pandora's box. You could go any way with it. The way not to go is the dark side, but it would tempt you because that would jump you right past the others. So you need to arrive at level 8 in the right age, not as young as Anakin. That young, the dark side is just too tempting. I'm going to take a minute to talk about John Williams now, especially since this is one of the greatest scored scenes in the whole film. John Williams says, I think the greatest opportunity we have in film music is to create an emotional element in a scene that may already be there, but perhaps we can enhance it. And if it isn't there, we might suggest it. If there's a scene between two very animated and opposed people who are actually lovers, the music may actually be telling us that there's something else, a kind of undertext about what their mental state might be. It can also support action. If a horse race accelerates towards the end of the event, the music may want to be in sync with that, push it along, and accelerate with it. If the music gets too fast, it may make the action seem a little bit slow, and vice versa. Another important part of music for films is the opportunity for a composer to create a melodic identification for a particular character or place, so that when you see that person or that person is mentioned, or suggested even by someone's thought, that theme can be played, and it's an oral identification for the listener. So in terms of atmosphere, identification of melody, action, choreographic timing, elements in the music, it's part of the corpus, the body of what a film is. As Bail Organa pulls up to rescue Yoda, his little space shuttle is modeled after a car from one of George Lucas's previous films, Tucker, the Man in His Dream. It was directed by Francis Ford Coppola and starred Jeff Bridges. John Williams continues to say, I have to confess, it's always a little daunting when I first see these things. My first impression is usually, so much? I'm not going to be able to write all that. I may ask George something like, how many weeks did you say we've got to do this in? And he'll tell me, and we laugh. I was always very impressed with this film, particularly the last third of it. I had some very positive and some very strong reactions to seeing the film, along with my usual first shock. I typically work backwards. I have to think about where the music is going to be at the end of the film and decompose it. So if it's something you're going to hear in the late part of the film, you'll have suggestions of that early on in the film. So I need to study the film and get to work on sequences that have to do with the denouement of the story. I usually look at the film and say, where do I know that I can start? What am I reasonably sure about? What can I handle at this particular moment without knowing more about the music? It's probably like a sculptor who will look at a stone and think, where do you want to risk injuring the stone? So I'll usually start with something straightforward to give me a sense of security. I will write a few measures or even more than a few measures, and pretty soon the information really begins to suggest itself as one works it out. You keep chipping away at the stone, and weeks later it's got the beginnings of a face on it. Most of this work is intuitive. People say, how do you know when you're on the right track? And I guess my answer is maybe we never know that. What's important in the work is that I do is one finds a rhythm. In any human endeavor, it's not so much the work we do, but the quality of the sustained work that we perform that will get us some distance to where we want to go. We always fall, I think, a little bit short of what we might want to achieve. There are 3 or 4 pieces of new material. A couple of them have to do with what I call lamentations. They accompany Anakin's turn from the light to the dark. There's also a fun piece, a lot of percussion for Grievous. But in this film, more than any other 5, there are references to earlier scenes, which seem to me, and to George, to be part of the way we want to tell the story musically. There's a reference to the Force theme, the positive side of the Force, which is referred to more and more in this film. There are even references to Princess Leia's forthcoming arrival. There are quotations of the Imperial March, and as Anakin is going through his process of change and becoming Darth Vader, we have more and more need to refer to earlier melodic references. And so it's a combination of new material and old material. It's quite a musical tapestry. We're going to a new choral piece, Battle of the Heroes, which does contain some references to Duel of the Fates, but most of it is entirely new. And again, it's Sanskrit, and it's a translation of a very simple line, which is, Grievous are the crimes of the Empire. We don't need to know what the Sanskrit words mean, but from the sound, we understand what the emotional intention of it is. The Star Wars saga is tragic in many ways, but there's also a new birth, plural in this sense. In this film, it has the contour of the great human stories. The people do terrible things and accomplish glowing, illustrious, and wondrous things also. So I think while it has its tragic aspect, and that's part of our musical role, it's also very positive. The epic slice that Obi-Wan delivers to Anakin's limbs, one arm, and both legs, is truly devastating, especially to have to do that to your best friend. Anakin's turned so evil, and Obi-Wan's speech that he delivers to Anakin is truly gut-wrenching. Being his brother and being the chosen one, Anakin has truly failed his master, and you can feel the agony in both of their expressions. And Anakin's "I hate you" is truly disturbing. Of course, this is where Anakin receives his extremely bad burns to cover his entire body. They require him to have life-sustaining apparatus, which becomes the iconic Darth Vader mask and suit of armor that will haunt generations in the galaxy. Dave Elzy, in the Creature Shop and creative supervisor, says he asked George in one of their very first meetings, how much can we burn him? George said it's going to be a bad burn, but for PG. Dave says he went away and spent about a week doing designs trying to do a PG-rated burn, and eventually went back to him and said, I don't know what a PG burn is. I think we should try and push it as far as we can. George said, okay, then we'll make it a PG-13. I thought, wow, that was unbelievably easy. That freed us up to do a very realistic, full-on burn. As Obi-Wan leaves Anakin, of course, he picks up that lightsaber of his as a memento. But then, of course, we know he ends up delivering it to Luke in the future in Episode 4. Naturally, the damage done to Padme means Anakin is living a self-fulfilling prophecy of trying to save his wife from dying in childbirth, ultimately being the reason she's dying in childbirth. Tragedy, indeed. as the Emperor arrives to retrieve Vader here on the rocky volcanic beach. Here in a minute, you can see Palpatine put his hand to his face. Anakin's face, that is. One can assume this is some sort of administering of healing. The Emperor sort of has a look about him as he approaches Anakin that he's a Grim Reaper or Master of Death. Something along these lines that really adds a nice spooky touch to the entire scene. Natalie Portman has a really great quote where she says, "Some people think bad people are always bad. They had this tendency towards aggression and control and power from the beginning. I think the most interesting thing about George's theory of morality is that evil comes out of a good intention from a good person. George Lucas says Anakin wants to have a family. He wants to be married to Padme and have children. When he sees in his dreams is that Padme is going to die, and he doesn't know how, but it's preordained. He's in love with her. He doesn't want her to die. He wants to possess her, to control that. He keeps getting himself deeper and deeper into this pickle. He wants a family, but at the same time, he knows he can't have one. Now the greed has taken over and the fear of losing his wife and baby. The whole point is you can't possess somebody because they are their own person. You can't dominate and make them do everything you want them to do." The scene we just saw here of Yoda sort of sitting and meditating was originally going to be a scene where Qui-Gon speaks to Yoda from the netherworlds of the Force, and there's actually a deleted scene you can watch on Disney Plus of that very thing. Technically, it's still happening, we just don't hear Qui-Gon's voice. But later, Yoda will mention to Obi-Wan that he's communed with him. As Anakin is transferred here to the medical facility with Palpatine, this scene in this shot, Palpatine is the only physical thing walking by, which is so funny. Everything else is CG. Anyway, as Anakin's transported here to the medical facility, and Padme also is transferred to one on Polis Massa, the little moon, there is a duality here of two operations happening at the same time to Anakin and Padme. And the sad thing is, as Padme dies, Vader is born. It's truly ironic. The little moon, Polis Massa, is somewhat of an homage in style to the moon in 2001: A Space Odyssey, as the opening establishing shot pans down across the moon. It's very similar to a scene in that film, and it's a nice touch and fitting salute to Stanley Kubrick, the iconic director. This overhead shot of Vader that we just saw being worked on is woven into the set, the graphic that looks just like the Imperial logo if you look closely. With his fully artificial limbs, particularly his arms, Vader will not be able to wield Force lightning due to the nature of the electrical prosthesis. The overall vibe that they really tried to convey in this scene with Vader as he's constructed is of Frankenstein's monster. The implication being that Palpatine created this monster and Anakin has slowly become the monster. Ryan Church, concept design supervisor, says, "I wanted to hint that the mask was painful to wear with lots of pointy things that poke Vader as it interfaces with him." As Padme delivers the babies, she's naming them firstborn Luke, the boy, secondborn is Leia, the girl, while at the same time, Darth Vader's being worked on. He receives his surgeries for healing, as well as being encased in his iconic suit, the suit that he will wear for the rest of his life. George Lucas mentions that Hayden finally making it into the suit completes the circle of the movies. That's the final missing piece. Now they're all connected. And as Vader takes his first breath here in his suit, you can really see up close in detail the smoke above him adjust to the breath. This happens just also as Padme takes her last breath. With Padme's dying breath, she lets Obi-Wan know that she feels that there's still good in Anakin. This does end up being true. Luke carries on her wishes and her feelings and ultimately helps redeem Vader in Return of the Jedi. But for now, Vader has risen to his height of power, ready to tear up the galaxy in the name of great evil. Really cool detail is that Hayden Christensen shared that everyone from the crew and the production office came out to bear witness and see Vader again. He says, as I walked past people I knew and was friends with, I watched their reactions. It was phenomenal. There was awe and excitement in their eyes, but there was also a certain level of respect that needed to be paid and a tinge of fear. As I walked by, they would gasp, and then they would lower their heads and take a couple of steps back, as you would if Vader was passing. There was a hint of sadness when I put on that costume. I was given the job of being the connective tissue from Jake Lloyd in Episode 1 to Darth Vader. Getting to finally don the dark helmet meant something bittersweet. My task was complete. Hayden also shared that it took about 20 minutes to get suited up. There's no Darth Vader underwear. I wore my own. It starts off with the pants, followed by the boots and a massive muscle suit. There's a leather jacket, and then a fiberglass chest piece. Then there's a leather jock piece, which looks a little funny. Then it's the helmet and the cape. The lights on the costume don't start blinking until they plug you in on the set. As each piece comes on, layer by layer, you feel the essence of Darth Vader overcoming you. To make adjustments for my height difference, they put huge lifts in the shoes, so it was difficult to walk. I told George I needed to practice walking around in the costume because my movements were so rigid and didn't feel like I was walking like Darth Vader, the one that we knew from the original trilogy. He told me, that's what I want. Anakin is not acclimated in this suit yet. He shouldn't be able to walk effortlessly. It was an interesting choice. Being behind the Vader mask is almost indescribable. It's so cool. It's empowering. A beastly feeling wells up inside you, and there's a sense of imprisonment. I thought that was appropriate for what Anakin should be feeling, but it's claustrophobic in there. Your vision is extremely limited. It's hot, and it's awkward to move around in. You can see what's directly in front of you and straight down because you're not seeing out through the eyes. You're looking out through the mouthpiece. There's no fighting in it. Just walk, hit the mark, and say a line. That's about the extent of it. I was a little nervous because I didn't want to fall over and scratch the suit. Having George look at me and smile ear to ear, it was one of those surreal moments that will stay with me for a very long time. It is decided that the two twins must be separated, and also the Jedi will separate for isolation and exile and solitude. One of my favorite deleted scenes from the film is of Yoda arriving to Dagobah in exile. I do wish that that was kept in the film, especially since it was such a short scene. Yoda sits Obi-Wan down briefly to discuss how Qui-Gon Jinn has returned from the netherworld of the Force and is on the path to immortality. He instructs Obi-Wan how to commune with him on his solitude in Tatooine. Qui-Gon has been studying with the ancient order of the Wills, and for a long time we never got to see anything further of this, but in the Obi-Wan Kenobi show on Disney Plus, we actually get a little bit into Obi-Wan trying to reach out. Bail Organa leaves the care of the droids C-3PO and R2-D2 in the care of Captain Antilles. They instruct C-3PO's mind to be wiped. We hear talk of Antilles in the next film, and now all 3PO knows is that he first worked with binary load lifter droids, as we learned in the original film on A New Hope. This mind wipe was in effect to ensure the safety of the new baby twins. The small line of dialogues 3PO has is the last line of the film, and then 3PO actually opens the film episode 4 with the first speaking dialogue, so he is the bookend. His funeral scene is in the same space as the parade from episode 1, which rhymes with that film. Natalie Portman remembers that they called this the end dress, speaking of her costume. She says, it's really, really beautiful. I think Trisha Bigger would have wanted to get an ocean sense. Someone said to me that it was very Ophelia, with the flowers and the hair. It does look like I'm drowning. I think that's really an interesting contrast to Anakin burning. The closing scenes here really go very fast, but we get a shot of some of the early Star Destroyers and the Death Star under construction as Vader and Palpatine look on, and as a Grand Moff Tarkin, young now, is with them. Christopher Lee, who actually played Count Dooku, was really good friends with Peter Cushing back when Peter was alive. He's the one who played Grand Moff Tarkin in the original Star Wars film. It must have been pretty surreal for him to appear with that character in this film, even though he'd already passed away. Of course, Peter Cushing was not able to play him regardless if he was alive or not, because he was much too old to play a young Tarkin in this film. The beauty of Alderaan is evident as the Organas bring their new baby girl to live with them in their home. Sadly, this is a view of the beautiful planet that is decimated in the film to come, the original Star Wars. Bail and his wife, Queen Breha of Alderaan, die at the mercy of the Death Star. We also get a cut of Obi-Wan delivering Luke to the Lars, Uncle Owen, and Aunt Beru. We were introduced to them in Attack of the Clones, and now we will be seeing them be the ones to take Luke on into the original trilogy, as a bookend into the entire saga of 6 films, all the way from A New Hope to The Empire Strikes Back, through Return of the Jedi, Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, and now Revenge of the Sith. There was actually a secret scene filmed on the Tatooine location shoot during Attack of the Clones, and it was of the scenes of the Lars homestead we see here in Episode 3 where Obi-Wan delivers Luke to them. We end on a beautiful binary sunset, put to the beautiful music of John Williams. Extremely iconic film series Star Wars has the score that will truly change the face of filmmaking and push the limits of what one can do. It's a very dark film, but I love how we end on such a very beautiful note. It always feels very emotional. George Lucas says that I am very happy with how it turned out, and I'm happy that I now have a 12-hour saga. It is important to me that you see the whole story from start to finish. I pretty much got everything I wanted. I'd say there are 96% of what I wanted. Even on the first films, I went back and fixed what I didn't like. That was the whole point of the special editions. So now I'm happy with those films too. I'm not at all frustrated the way I was before. With that, we're at the end of the film and on to the end credits. As the credits roll, I have a few more quotes and musings that I'd love to share with you. May extend to the post credits as well, but feel free to stick around and listen into these. Paul Duncan wrote a chapter in the Star Wars Archives book from Taschen where he had a small interview with George Lucas, and he asked him, "You talked about circles within circles and a bigger structure. The films all often have mirrored events. So episode 1 is like episode 6, episode 2 is like episode 5, and episode 3 is like episode 4. For example, the Gungans fighting the droids is like the Ewoks fighting the stormtroopers, only the Ewoks win. Obi-Wan holding Qui-Gon as he dies echoes Luke holding Darth Vader. The love story of Anakin and Padme mirrors Leia and Han. The Clone War on Geonosis is like the battle on Hoth. And the rescue of Palpatine is like the rescue of Leia in 4. There are also recurring events. Dooku cuts off Anakin's hand, and then Anakin cuts off Luke's hand. The transferal of one father figure to another. Anakin from Obi-Wan to Palpatine in episode 3, and Luke from Lars to Obi-Wan in 4. I could go on, there's a long list. George Lucas says, "You're right, it's like a mandala. As you write, you're doodling, but there are certain themes that keep repeating themselves in different forms. When I did the first film, I planned to do 3, so there were pieces in there that I expected to pay off later. That's why I put back Jabba the Hutt scene in New Hope, a special edition, because he was the bad guy for 6. Paul Duncan says, "Were you conscious of those specifics as you were writing it, or was it an intuitive process?" George says, "Some of it is intuitive, but after 4, I intentionally thought, okay, we're showing you an idea, but now I'm going to turn it inside out and show it to you again. Then I'm going to show it to you again in a different way." And then with the prequels, it became about comparing, this is what Anakin did and this is what Luke did. Playing those ideas back and forth was fascinating to me because I was able to intertwine their actions. We have the scene where Anakin decides to save Palpatine and join him so they could learn how to save Padme. The equivalent scene in 6 is where the Emperor is trying to get Luke to kill his dad so he can save his sister. If you watch the films in order from 1 to 6, you'll see a different story from the one you remember. A big scene like the "I'm your father" speech has a completely different feeling when you already know Darth's his father, and you're waiting for Luke to find out. Dramatically, I don't think it hurts anything to have some of the answers before you get the question. The films become more about the progression of the characters. You learn that Darth Vader isn't this monster. He's a pathetic individual who's made a pact with the devil and lost. And he's trapped. He's a sad, pathetic character, not an evil big monster. I mean, he's a monster in that he's turned to the dark side and he's serving a bad master, and he's into power and he's lost a lot of his humanity. In that way, he's a monster. But beneath that, as Luke says in Return of the Jedi to Leia, there is good in him, I felt it. Only through the love of his children and the compassion of his children who believe in him, even though he's a monster, does he redeem himself. Paul Duncan says he had dreams about his mother as well as Padme and could not save her. George says, right, he's walking into a death trap, and there's no way out. Paul says Palpatine has been grooming him by saying how powerful he is. Lucas responds and also saying that my mentor told me that there was a way that you could stop death, which was a lie. They can't. Anakin got sold a bill of goods because he wanted it so bad that he'd believe anything anybody would sell him. Paul says Palpatine's a snake oil salesman. George says it's a scam. Anakin made a pact with the devil. I want the power to save somebody from death. I want to be able to save them from going to the river Styx, and I need to be a god to do that. But the gods won't do it, so I'm going to go down to Hades and get the Dark Lord to allow me to have this power that will allow me to save the person I want to hang on to. Ultimately, it's about power. He's traded his soul for power. It's Faust. The more power he wants and the more power he gets, the more he loses. The devil says you can become more powerful, but you must pass first this test. The first test is you must kill your mother. The second test, you have to kill your wife. And the third test, you have to kill your best friend. In the end, you have all this power, but you have nobody to share it with, except some wizened old man who's even more evil than you are. If you're going to sell your soul to save somebody you love, that's, as we say in the film, unnatural. You have to accept the natural course of life. Death is obviously the biggest of them all. Not only death for yourself, but death for the things you care about. Paul says after the suit has been put on, Vader emerges and starts crushing everything around him. Why does he not revolt against Darth Sidious? George says he hears that Padme died. He's got put on the operating table before he got a chance to save her, and she died. So it's more railing at the gods or the fates that, given another month, I could have saved her. He thinks he was powerful enough on the landing platform before Obi-Wan intervened. So he looks at it as bad luck or fate that he couldn't get the thing accomplished in time to save his wife. And now it's over. She's dead. Vader was going to be extremely powerful, but he ended up losing his arms and legs and becoming partly a robot. So a lot of his ability to use the Force, a lot of his powers are curbed at this point, because as a living form, there's not that much of him left. So his ability to be twice as good as the Emperor disappeared, and now he's maybe 20% less than the Emperor. That isn't what the Emperor had in mind. He wanted the super guy, but that got derailed by Obi-Wan. With Luke, he can get a more primo version if he can turn Luke to the dark side. Luke is faced with the same issues and practically the same scenes that Anakin is faced with. Anakin says yes, and Luke says no. Paul says, so why is Vader now subservient to Darth Sidious afterwards if he cannot save Padme? Lucas says, what else is he gonna do? It's hard for somebody like that to get a job, you know? Paul says, I've got a vision now of Darth Vader picking up his local newspaper, looking through the job ads. Lucas says, wanted, thug. Paul says, must be over 6'3". Lucas says, right, but he's all vengeance, hate, frustration. It's all the dark side anger. He's steeped in that now. He's going off on his revenge life to take it out on everybody. He's got a job. Sidious says, you're going to be my special right-hand guy. Nobody else in the Empire thinks that much of him. He's not the see-all, know-all, powerful evil guy. He's mostly a beat-up tin can. But he's powerful in a way that only the Emperor knows, which is with the Force. Nobody else believes in the Force. I mean, the Jedi had the Force and it didn't help them much, and they all got killed. So he's a regular guy in a bad situation doing bad things. Here's a neat detail about Yoda's arrival on Dagobah to his exile. Lucas is reviewing an animation of Yoda on October 12th, 2004, as he surveys Dagobah from his vessel at the end of Revenge of the Sith. Rob, I assume Rob Coleman, asks George if he's looking too sad. Yeah, Lucas responds, Yoda should bring his head up faster. He should look around because this is his new world. I think the word here is wise. Yoda has to have a we will have our day look on his face. He's going to persevere. Hayden Christensen has a quote about George Lucas from the Entertainment Weekly magazine in a Star Wars special, The Ultimate Guide to the Complete Saga. He's quoted as saying, "You could see it in George's eyes. He was much more passionate this time around. Every time we would finish a take, he was up from behind the monitors with a hop and very articulate about what he was envisioning in his head. Upon viewing the final product, no less a luminary than Lucas's longtime friend and collaborator Steven Spielberg called Sith the most honorable swan song of George's Star Wars career." George Lucas says, "When I did a fantasy film, we were really bumping up against the ceiling of technology all the time, which made it very hard. I'm a strong believer of cinema as cinema, not as a literary medium, and not as a musical medium, and not as a theatrical medium, but cinema as the moving image. And so I was able to design a fantasy film and push the limits of the medium of the cinematic form just a tiny bit. But what I really wanted to do was much grander and much bigger and much more outrageous. But I knew that I couldn't do that. I could only do so much with the technology I had. So I've always been pushing that technology. I've always been thinking, wouldn't it be great if we could do this? Or if we could do that? But most of the time you would get stopped. You couldn't do a movie with 20,000 extras. You wouldn't even think of writing a scene like that. But now you can do it. Now you can pretty much do whatever you want. You're in the same arena that writers are in. If you can write it, you can film it." George W. Lucas was born on May 14, 1944, in Modesto, California. After graduating from the University of Southern California, he directed THX 1138, American Graffiti, and 4 Star Wars films. He has executive produced Francis Ford Coppola's Tucker, The Man and His Dream, Jim Henson's Labyrinth, 1986, Ron Howard's Willow, 1988, Lawrence Kasdan's Body Heat, 1981, Akira Kurosawa's Kagemusha, 1980, Walter Murch's Return to Oz, Paul Schrader's Mishima, 1985, Steven Spielberg's Indiana Jones trilogy, and of course the other 2 Star Wars films. He has helped pioneer several visual effects breakthroughs, began what became Pixar animation, and spearheaded digital filmmaking. With 7 months of work left on Revenge of the Sith, though it's impossible to speak of it as complete, certain observations can be made. For 3 years, a nonstop barrage of art and ideas created by an incredibly talented group of core collaborators has gone through the filter of Lucas's mind, inspiring certain conceits and mixing with his own. The ultimate design of the movie's scripts, sets, vehicles, characters, and shots is the expression of a writer-director whose vision is at once popular and abstract, the detached eye of the documentarian, and the immensely almost idiosyncratically emotional lens of the man. The 2 Star Wars trilogies share many characters but have different structures. Instead of telling another heroic coming-of-age story, Lucas has crafted in the prequels a historical drama, at whose center is Anakin Skywalker. His story is tragic, that of the Republic turned Empire, uncomfortably familiar. Anakin begins as a 9-year-old boy who is physically enslaved. He ends the prequel saga a spiritual and mental slave to the Emperor, who is his metaphorical if not biological father. First seen in Episode 1 as beset by a crippling bureaucracy, the Republic Senate is, by the end of Episode 3, a rubber stamp for the Empire. As the locale for the duel between the Emperor and Yoda, the Senate finally becomes what it has always been, a physical manifestation of the external conflict between totalitarianism and democracy. But the end of Revenge of the Sith is not the end of Anakin, whose story really closes when it merges with those of his children, Luke and Leia, in Return of the Jedi. It really has to do with learning, Lucas says. Children teach you compassion. They teach you to love unconditionally. Anakin can't be redeemed for all the pain and suffering he's caused. He doesn't right the wrongs. But he stops the horror. The end of the saga is simply Anakin saying, I care about this person regardless of what it'll mean to me. I will throw away everything that I have, everything that I've grown to love, primarily the Emperor, and throw away my life to save this person. And I'm doing it because he has faith in me. He loves me despite all of the horrible things I've done. I broke his mother's heart, but he still cares about me, and I can't let that die. Anakin is very different in the end. The thing of it is, the prophecy was right. Anakin was the chosen one, and he does bring balance to the Force. He takes the ounce of good still left in him and destroys the Emperor out of compassion for his son. Anakin Skywalker's final confrontation with the Emperor occurs during Luke's first confrontation with the Emperor, which complements his father's dealings with the same man many years earlier. Indeed, the life of the father and the life of the son are commentaries on each other. One of Lucas's tendencies, evident throughout his films, is to tell simultaneous stories, many of which are interconnected. I came out of editing, and that's probably part of it, Lucas says. I have a short attention span, and that's probably part of it too, he laughs. It's just my nature. The Star Wars saga is like a symphony, which has recurring themes, he adds. You have one theme orchestrated in a particular way in place, which then comes back orchestrated as a minor theme somewhere else. These are the little threads running through things that are constantly turning events on their head. You see two people confronting the same things with different ends. It's a rhythm. I like the idea of seeing something from different perspectives. An advantage I have in this particular situation is that I have literally 12 hours to tell a story. It has the epic quality of following one person from the time he's 9 years old to the time he dies. It's Anakin's story, but obviously there are many other characters in that story. His children, his best friend, and their stories carry through. So this isn't just a tune, it's a symphony. When you do it as a symphony, I think it actually becomes beautiful. That was the closing excerpt of The Making of Revenge of the Sith by J.W. Rinsler, and is a wonderful, beautifully written piece by him. The legacy of Revenge of the Sith is that it is truly one of the most beloved of all the Star Wars films, especially in the prequel trilogy. It was a bit controversial when it came out, as most of the Star Wars films are. The fan base can get kind of polarized, but ultimately, it was made on a budget of $115 million. It earned $849 million in the global box office. Some reception numbers. Rotten Tomatoes critics currently have 79%, audience score 65%, IMDb 7.6, and Metacritic 68%. The film opened May 19th, 2005. It has since been re-released, and in 2025, for the 20th anniversary, it was one of the highest grossing re-releases ever. I think that we will probably see it again in the future, hopefully for the 30th, 40th, on and on. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this and celebrating Revenge of the Sith with me for its 20th anniversary. This was truly a extremely great learning experience for myself, and hopefully it has been for you. Check out my YouTube channel for some additional features that I could not shove into this 2.5-hour recording. I really look forward to interacting with you on my YouTube channel. My name is Dean. This has been On the Brink. Look for more great Star Wars content coming your way. Thank you so much for listening, and don't forget to subscribe. Bye.